Well, Singapore's defence spending is set to rise, but the Defence Ministry says winning a war is not just about the weapons, it's also about resilience, a theme that's playing out in the war in Ukraine.
We have two guests in studio today to help us reflect on geopolitical uncertainty. Tommy Wong, he is a retired major in the Singapore Army, and Trina Liang, co-chair of the Advisory Council on Community Relations in Defence, otherwise known as ACCORD. Good evening to both of you, and thank you so much for joining, Trini and Tommy. Tommy, you've seen news about what's happening in Ukraine. How is mental strength when it comes to a conflict like that?
There's a combination of core values. We just not mental stress or mental solution can just drop from the sky. It has to be inculcated from young. That's what I believe as a soldier. Core values like care for one another, acceptance of our diversity, right? And also realize that our population is very diverse. I will consider that our country is different from the US, where they say there is a melting pot. For ours in Singapore, I will consider that we are a salad bowl with different ingredients, but a common sauce that binds us together. That's heko.
Right.
So if this value is built, then they will be able to think properly. And throughout school years, younger years, go up to national service level, due to the training and also constant reminder of what we should do, our responsibility, accountability, then the mental values will be there. And they'll be able to face resistance better.
Trina, bring you into the conversation now. You know, that picture of war, it's something so foreign to Singaporeans, something we don't always think about. But now, when we see Ukraine, what are the sort of lessons and mental strength that we can take away from that?
Yeah, sure. You know, in Singapore, we are almost lulled into this belief that we are so peaceful, it's also secure, you know, there's nothing much to worry about. We go to work, we come back. But, you know, when we look at what has happened to Ukraine, I think many of us realize that this could well happen to Singapore. There are threats to Singapore as well. And I think this is where total defense comes in. I think it's so important to realize that with what has happened to Ukraine, you see that whole 6 pillars of total defense actually in effect in Ukraine. And I think in Singapore, it's almost like a role model for us to see how total defense comes all together, whether it be military, economic, social, civil, psychological, and cyber, it's all coming together. And we see it playing out before us. And, you know, for Ukraine to be facing such a big, powerful oppressor and still fighting, I mean, I think it gives us a lot of hope and a belief that with the right amount of fighting spirit and psychological defense, we can overcome too.
Singapore has, of course, seen war in its history. Tommy, you lived through World War II during the Japanese occupation. Those were very difficult years.
Right.
Can you tell us something about your experience?
It was a trail of misery, I would say. The important thing is that we must realize at that time, we depend on others to depend on us. We must not think of having outsider defenders. Most importantly, we must be able to remember always that self-defense is the best defense. Right?
Interesting.
So, I mean, I wonder if that's something you would agree with, Trina. And also, I'm curious, as the co-chair of a defense feedback channel, I'm wondering, what are some of the concerns that Singaporeans are sharing with you on defense issues?
Sure. I think the most common thing is always to hear parents being concerned about their sons going to NS. But also, I'm hearing more about like people saying, why should we do anything? We're such a small country, really, can we defend ourselves? And I really come back to total defense, right? And I look at Ukraine again, and this is something that we can do. And frankly, if no one steps up to fight for us, that we can only rely on ourselves. And I think that that is a very important thing. If we want to preserve our life, our family, our friends, the way we live, I think it's so important that we fight for ourselves. And that is something that we can't just rely on with the military defense systems that we have. I think the people, the citizenry, have a very important part to play as well.
Well, Tommy was, just now talking about his experience during World War II in Singapore. Tommy, you talked about your experience with World War II in Singapore. You were young, you were just young then, but by the time you were about 6, 7 years old, the war ended.
Yeah.
But you were surrounded by adults who were, facing a lot of difficulty, your family. Mental strength was very important back then to see through those 3.5 years of Japanese occupation, correct?
To think back, I think it is, of course, stressful, but it also reminds me, or all of us, that we must not let this happen again. It is very important. That's why it is important for us now to have our own defense, right?
Yeah.
And from the past, we learn how do we better take care of ourselves, our country, so that we can be able to face challenges together.
Yeah,
that is an important thing.
We have to face it. That's what resilience is about.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Trina, perhaps the last question to you to wrap it up. When times are uncertain, when the nation is under threat, what would you say to the community? For example, women, students, even the elderly. What would you say to them would be their roles?
Right. Well, total defense is the best preparation, response, and recovery under any threat. And, I think it's imperative for all of us to play a part. I think it's important that, as women, we support the men in this, but don't forget that women are also now playing a part in the armed forces, and 8% of our armed forces are women, and that's going to rise in the future as well. So we are not just, playing administrative positions in the armed forces anymore. We're also doing combat positions as well.
And you had a taste of that, didn't you?
I did indeed. That was very interesting, actually. But, we support the men as wives, as mothers, as girlfriends. But we too, looking at the 6 pillars, have a part to play. And it's all down to really figuring out where we fit in. Psychological defense, cyber defense are things that I think women have a lot to give as well.
All right, we'll leave it there for now, but really appreciate the both of you coming in and speaking with us. And most of all, reminding us why peace is so important. We've been speaking with retired Major Tommy Wong and co-chair of Accord, Trina Liang.